Welcome to the first in a series of Geospatial Big Data webinars presented by GCS of Missoula, Montana. Today's webinar topic is Building, Deploying, and Managing a Geospatial Application in the Cloud. Hi, my name is Kevin Corbley, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. Let me set the stage for our first webinar by providing some context. We hear a lot about big data, but it's important to understand that geospatial organizations face big data challenges that are unique to them. And with this webinar series, GCS will show you how custom solutions can be developed both efficiently and cost-effectively to address those challenges. Today we'll be discussing how a GIS application can be built and deployed in the Microsoft Azure platform with minimal risk and maximum benefit to the enterprise. As an example, we'll be taking a look at the Montana Site Selector application created by GCS. And for those of you unfamiliar, GCS is a geospatial solutions company that delivers intelligent analytics through cloud networks and mobile platforms to provide complex answers to complex business problems. And let me take a minute to introduce our presenters today. Dr. Alex Philp is the president and founder of GCS, and we'll also have Fred Spataro. He's a senior engineer at GCS. And we'll also be joined by Ryan Hansen, a GCS account manager for the Montana Site Selector application, and he'll be showing us a quick demonstration. And before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. And we have 1 hour scheduled for the webinar today, and we plan to finish right on time. And please also note that the audience members are muted for the entire broadcast. But we do value your participation, so please don't hesitate to send our panel a question. And you can do that at any time during the webinar by typing it into the questions box on the right side of your screen. And we'll answer as many of those as we can live during the last 15 minutes or so of the session today. And today's webinar is being recorded. You'll receive a link shortly after we're done today letting you know where you can access the recording. And finally, we encourage you to register for our second webinar on August 15th. The topic will be Moving to Mobility, Leveraging Location Analytics. A registration link will be included in the follow-up email you'll be getting from us. And let's take a quick look at the agenda for today. Dr. Alex Philp will be starting us off, and he's going to provide a solutions overview. And then we're going to take a look at some of the technical details from Fred Spataro, and he'll be joined by Ryan Hansen for that site selector demo we discussed. And then we're going to bring Alex back on for conclusions and wrap up. And then Alex and Fred are going to turn their mics on once again for the Q&A session at the end. We hope to have about 15 minutes or so to answer your questions. So what are our goals for today? In other words, what should you expect to take away from today's session? Well, here's what we think you're going to learn. First of all, the highlights of building in Microsoft Azure. Also, the benefits of the hybrid cloud architecture. And there's also going to be information on managing the application once it's up and running. And perhaps most importantly, you'll learn tips on reducing the total cost of ownership and improving the overall return on investment on a project like this. And there will also be tips on delivering for the customer. And that's it for me in the introduction. I'm going to hand it over to Alex Philp, and he's going to start the formal presentation. Alex, take it away.
Hey, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome to all of our participants and attendees today. It's a real honor to have you all here with us. And on behalf of GCS, we're really, really excited to be launching this webinar series on geospatial big data. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about the cloud, but this represents a significant thrust for our company moving forward, and we wanted to share that with as many people that were interested. Generally, when we talk about geospatial big data, we're talking about the convergence of three major trends in geospatial IT. That's represented by our infographic: analytics, mobility, and the cloud. As we progress today, we're really going to be drilling down into a case study, a use case study about the cloud and cloud delivery and how we did that and what that means. Essentially, like many of you heard, we're dealing with the 4V problem in big data. We're dealing with volume issues, velocity, a lot of different types of data, and increasingly the question of veracity. The truthfulness or the authenticity of data is very, very important. What we like to talk about also at GCS, in addition to Gartner's 4 V's, 3 V's, or what we're calling the 3 A's of geospatial big data. And that is accessibility of information, affordability in the solutions that are being architected. In today's world, that's as important as anything, and how quickly we can get to solution. A lot of our customers have ideas and needs and desires. A lot of you do too. And what we want to do is try to build frameworks and architectures and infrastructure that supports agility. And ultimately, we're arguing, and one of our main points is that if you talk about geospatial big data, we've got to be talking more than location analytics. There's a lot more to geospatial big data than where something is. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. One way we thought it would be helpful to try to unpack the cloud for the attendees today is to really talk about customer requirements. What drove this project? We're a solutions company, and we built a solution. So essentially, our customer, which was a state agency, state government, came to us and said, look, we want to integrate all this map stuff with the census stuff, with marketing information, so we can drive economic development in Montana. This is the notion of the Site Selector portal. We had built bits and pieces of that, but we had never brought it together into one integrated application that could be managed in a cloud. Number two, they wanted it to be hosted. They were tired of wasting money trying to do this themselves. Somewhere between data centers and their own infrastructure, they had so many bottlenecks, both legal and technical, that they were struggling. So they said, you host it. Thirdly, they wanted to leverage existing code. They had made a major investment in code. They had understood web services, and they wanted to expand. Finally, they were really challenging us to try to help them move from an existing model of paying for software licenses to try to move to pay for use. So a significant shift in terms of moving from paying for software licenses to a use model, transaction-based. And then finally, they wanted to consolidate all this into a single phone call. And what I mean by that is they wanted one place they could call that would handle all elements of their experience and do it seamlessly, so they had an accountability point in delivery when it came to their business process. And we basically signed up for that duty. Essentially, we sold them on the cloud benefits. Now, to many of you on the call, this is not going to be new information, and a lot of this is debatable. We get that. But one of the ways we started to frame out the solution was absolutely migrating from a license model to a use model. People are getting tired of paying for, essentially, licenses that are underutilized. They want to pay for use, transaction-based. And we had to frame this up so we could basically monitor the use over time and basically guarantee them risk management in terms of their cost. Second of all, we needed to reduce the reliance on localized infrastructure and personnel. This is important for our client as well as GCS. We are having a hard time basically funding highly depreciated assets, and we wanted to take advantage of the infrastructure available. Number two, we had to give them major increase in uptime reliability. They needed to achieve scalability that they could model in terms of their financial forecasting based on use, as well as this notion of elasticity. We needed to consolidate security exposure. There's not a day that doesn't go by when we're talking about cyber attacks, so we needed to understand how we manage security better and ultimately focus on developing application versus managing infrastructure. So much money is being spent right now on servers, on networks, on administration, on bandwidth, on cyber infrastructure. We wanted to decrease our costs there and move it up in terms of spending money on developing code. So the solution that you see that we built essentially is what's known as the Site Selector solution. This was publicly announced back in July of 2012 as a cloud-centric application with lots of pieces. Essentially, the footprint for the Site Selector solution as an enterprise solution for the entire state of Montana is essentially everything you see in red. Hundreds of thousands of customers, hundreds of thousands of users within that territory. And basically, the application is now being delivered as a managed application in the cloud that essentially drives business process optimization. Reporting, solutions, all of that coming together into a one-stop shop for our client, essentially within a cloud framework. The architecture that we are dealing with here, essentially, in a very quick way, is a commingling of a hybrid architecture. We brought together elements of Azure, we brought together elements of Esri, GCS's own infrastructure, multiple listing services into a hybrid solution that met the needs of our client. And ultimately, what that did for us is it made for a very rich, dynamic, multi-component solution that ultimately met the affordability margin of our client. Now, with that being said, what I'd like to do is turn the more technical aspects of today's discussion over to one of my colleagues. That gentleman is, again, Fred Spataro, who is the senior engineer at GCS and the real visionary behind how we achieved really the building, the construction, the deployment, and management of the solution in the cloud. Fred?
Hello, everyone. My name is Fred Spataro, and as Alex and Kevin introduced, I'm a senior engineer and technical architect here at GCS. This was one of our very first full-blown applications to go up into Azure. So there was quite a number of learning experiences to go on here about how does this work? Is it different? Does it end up being about the same? So this was, like I said, our first one, and you know, like anything you do first, you make a few missteps or learning experiences, but in the end, I think we ended up with something that is really awesome, and and something that, you know, frankly, it was a joy to kind of handle in terms of the platform and being able to use the Azure platform in a way that you know, we could do things that were, you know, above and beyond what we had capabilities in-house and things like that. So the project is a .NET ASP application. We used Visual Studio 2012. The database is a SQL Azure database. It's a shared instance. It's not its own VM running SQL Server, so we're housing inside of SQL Azure. We are doing a couple interesting things in terms of actually storing our geometries into the database as well. So one of the reasons why we waited just a little bit longer on the Azure SQL was because it took a little bit while for them to support the geometries and some of the spatial functions again into SQL Azure. So once that was ready, then we were able to go. We also were working with the Entity Framework for data transfer between the app and the database, and both of those, when SQL Azure and the Entity Framework 5 came out, there was a lot of support for the geometry and the spatial types and things like that. So it was a good timing in terms of what we were doing and how we wanted to design our database and our application. So from the technical standpoint, you know, in general, it's mostly a JavaScript application at the front side. It will make some, obviously, calls back to the web server to compile some data and get the data out of the database and run some extra functions. But in general, a lot of the work is running JavaScript in the client side in the browser. We're using the ArcGIS for JavaScript API. And we're also using jQuery and Dojo JavaScript libraries for a lot of the framework stuff. So, and overall, we put together everything in about you know, a month's time frame. So, or sorry, a year's time frame from design. A lot of design up front, as Alex was alluding to. We really designed what the client wanted before we did a lot of the development, and we've been making updates on a quarterly basis at this point. So. I guess a couple more of the technical things that we've been using. So we're using ArcGIS Server 10.1. That's actually an in-house a server that supplies some of the mapping, the mapping data and things like that. So the application, the full application is kind of a very a multi-site use in the sense that there's parts of the application coming from a very distributed set of servers, some of it on-premise, some of it in the cloud. So, and in the end, it turned out that that worked very well for us. So there weren't any huge hurdles to doing that kind of stuff. So we, using the Azure project, the Visual Studio templates and the tools right inside Visual Studio for all of our work. And there's a little bit of learning curve there, but once the developers started to feel comfortable with it, they really enjoyed the process of working with that environment and those tools, and quickly adapted to the Azure development styles. One of the big tricks, I guess I would say, is that we had to use the Azure blob storage for work. For storing things just like the images. The Site Selector is, in a sense, a real estate app, and the users really want to be able to add pictures and documents and things like that about the site. So in a traditional web app, you would either store those right in the database, or you would store them in a file system. And since our first version, the files and the images were all stored on the file system, we decided to go with the file system type storage mechanism again, and in this case we ended up having to use the blob storage in Azure, and that presents a little bit of interesting kind of workarounds and things like that, so that you're learning how to actually interact with blob storage and call out the blob storage from the application and route URLs directly to the blob storage. So I would say that's probably one of the high notes of probably the major architecture changes that needed to go on there. Again, going back to the integrated nature and the distributed nature of the application. So the application spans the state of Montana, and there are at least 5 or 6 multiple listing services and real estate transaction entities that are housing all of the data and things like that for the listings. Originally, we designed it as a agent comes in and types in their own information, and then quickly we got feedback that, hey, I'm already typing this in somewhere else, and is there any way you can just pull it right from that listing service that's already available? And after asking around and kind of jumping through a little bit of political hoops, we were able to get access from a programmatic standpoint to a number of the MLS databases, and so now we can run nightly, weekly syncs from those listing services and embed them directly into our application. So one of the nice things for the users that they requested, and we were able to work on right away. So. The final other part I think that is really key to the application, again, goes to the distributed nature, is that at any point when you find a location that you're interested in, you can then call and ask for business reports, as you'll see, and business data, census data, things like that. So again, now we're taking the user's request, sending them over to one of ESRI's services, in this case their Business Analyst Online API, and extracting back out reports of that various data. All right, so we'll just kind of, next couple slides here, just a little bit of the picture of what it looks like in Azure if you've never seen it. But one of the things, again, that we really like about Azure is the interface is very easy to use. Even some of the account managers can get in there. They can access the hosting costs and things like that, how much is going on. We can store a number of different databases and have a number of different services, and the interface is all there. You've got your typical dashboard and monitoring and things like that. They're all readily available. We get to see what's going on. And again, one of the things that the developers really liked about being able to use Azure was that they were able to stand up both development and staging and production instances of the system, and get them up there very quickly, go ahead and test something, go ahead and then roll from one, development stage to the other. So as dev was getting more stable, they would, have our testers work on it in a staging environment, and then be able to just, with a click of a button, swap between those deployments. And then once we hit the oh, this is all ready to go, we were able to switch that instance right over to production. And then for, one of those kind of things where we find, every once in a while you find a bug that you just missed completely that really causes problems, we're able to switch back from instance and recover to a different state. Go ahead, just you can kind of flick through these, but the Azure SQL works just like from a developer standpoint, it's just like working with the other SQL servers instances. You can connect from SQL Server Management Studio. You see your tables and all your database entities and objects and things like that. You can do select star. You can write queries against it with the management interface. So from a developer standpoint, using the Azure SQL instance was pretty much a no-brainer. There was, like I said, a few things that we had to do, and there's some capabilities that aren't there in the full-blown SQL instance. But in general, for a a typical website application, the Windows Azure SQL instance, the shared instances were definitely easy to use, and we didn't run into any troubles going to them. So. And then this slide again, just talking about the ability to publish from Azure right up to, publish to Azure right from Visual Studio. So again, these are the tools that allow you to go right from, your web app to the Azure instance and things like that. So, and then it was able to show you your configurations in the cloud and things like that. This slide is again a look at the blob storage. So all of the images that we were storing for everything is stored and has its own URL there in the blob storage. So that really made it very easy to get around the keep the images persistent over VMs being turned on and turned off and instances going down and things like that. So this blob storage was our persistent storage area for the application. All right, that was pretty much the brief in 10 minutes explanation of the application and its technology, and I'm going to turn it over back to Kevin, and we can go on to a little bit of a demo.
Okay, Fred. Hey, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. And before we move on to the demo, just a quick reminder out to the audience that you can go ahead and submit your questions at any time. We already have a few. And just do that through the questions box, and we will answer those live, as many as we can, at the end. So let me bring on Ryan Hansen now. He's the GCS account manager for Site Selector, and he's going to give us a quick demo of the application itself. Ryan, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Kevin. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we did want to give a brief demo so everyone could have a basic understanding of the final product. Simply put, the Montana Site Selector is a sophisticated tool designed to provide access to the critical information needed for entrepreneurs to start or grow a business in the state of Montana. People use the site in a variety of ways, but it was designed with two uses in mind. First, for those individuals who are looking for a site for a new or expanding business, and secondly, for business owners who aren't necessarily looking to expand, but need to evaluate market conditions to make more informed decisions in their existing business. So, for example, let's take a look at that first scenario. Let's say I own a bike shop in Whitefish. We've had great success there and want to expand into the Bozeman market, a town with similar demographics. One of the first steps in this expansion effort is, of course, to find a suitable location for the new store. So we'll start by searching the Bozeman MLS feed within Site Selector for available commercial properties. There are a couple hundred listings, so we'll need to narrow our search. So I'm just gonna go over here to the search tab and start deselecting anything that isn't a retail space. lease or buy, we don't have an opinion at this point, but we do have a lot of bikes, so we need to make sure that there's at least 1,000 square feet of space. And lastly, we're going to scroll down here to Bozeman, and I passed it. As you can see, there's 213 listings right now, so narrowing this down is going to be important. And once you click search, it's going to zoom right into the Bozeman area. On the left is the search results in list form, and then on the right is, of course, the results on the map. I'm going to continue to zoom in here just a little bit so we can get close to the heart of Bozeman. So again, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this. We're only going to scratch the surface. I just want to sort of give everybody a sense of the functionality here. So these are all the listings in Bozeman that meet my criteria. You just set the cursor over them and you can get some basic information. But say I'm interested in this site, we can click to get some details here, and those details are going to come up on the left. So from here you can just quickly scroll through the photos and get other information that is a direct feed from the MLS. So let's say we want to save this property for analysis later. So we're going to click Add to My Properties. And just so we have something to compare, let's get one more property in here. So this one was by the university. A lot of our customers are university students, but let's say maybe we're interested in a downtown location. So let's pick this space right here. We're going to also add this one to My Properties. Okay, so from there we've got our saved properties over in this tab here, but we want to clear out all of these other search results so we can simplify this. So we're gonna clear that piece there, and we're gonna come back here to display again our two properties that we're interested in. So from here we're going to start running a whole host of reports, and depending on your business, depending on the demographics and the psychographics of our customers, our target customers, we're going to want to run different reports. So again, I'm just going to run through a few basics here. First, before we run a report, I want to show the drive time polygons from each of our sites. Say I'm interested in seeing sort of how far we can get from each location in 2 minutes drive time. And we're also going to start running a report with just a business summary. So I'm going to go ahead and click Run Report. This process of running these reports is fast, but I do have them pulled up here, so we're not wasting any time. So I've just pulled up what this would look like. You can you can save these reports in PDF or Excel format. But essentially, what we're looking at here is is a summary of all businesses this report's within a 1 mile drive time of the first site that we selected. There's 219 businesses within a mile. There's 1,000 employees, 3,000 residential, 3,000 residents within that mile. And as you can see here, just a lot of great information that would better inform your decision-making process when deciding on a site. So one thing that I think is interesting here is we can quickly see here that if we scroll down to the sporting goods line, we have one business within a 1 minute drive time of the site that we're proposing, and that business has one employee. So whether or not that's good for our business or not is an individual is a decision that you can make individually. So here we come back to the report, and we can see here. Oops, I'm going to zoom out. So here we've got these drive time polygons. So this too, you can get a better sense of what neighborhoods are accessible to your business at any time. But I do want to show you just a couple of more reports. One of the ones that you can run is a business locations report, and this breaks down the first 300 closest businesses to each of these locations that you've selected. Here you can see here that right next door to our first location is a pediatrics business. They have 3 employees and an estimated sales revenue of $140,000 a year. So again, just some really, really fascinating information that up until something like this, up until Site Selector was developed in Montana, this information was just not easily accessible in Montana. You know, then a couple of other reports that we can get at is, you know, recreational expenditures. Again, if we're in the bike business, we want to know how much the average household is spending on recreational goods. There's actually a line down here for bicycles. The average household spends $14 in Bozeman. For, you know, total, you know, local market potential is $22,000 for the bike business in Bozeman. Again, really important information for entrepreneurs. So again, I'm sorry that I had to rush through this. There's a lot of information here. There's over 5,000 data variables, but unfortunately, I need to pass it back over to Kevin so we can stay on track here. Back to you, Kevin.
Okay, boy, that was great, Brian. I have to say, as a business owner myself, I'm astonished at the amount of information, not just about real estate and properties, but about other businesses as well as demographics in the area. I can see how that would be tremendously useful to anybody thinking about locating their business in Bozeman. Anyway, well, that was a great demonstration, and what I'm going to do is give the audience one more reminder to send your questions in. It looks like we have several already, and some of them are pretty technical. So I'm going to ask Dr. Alex Philp to come back on and wrap up the formal part of the presentation. Alex?
Hey, thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Fred, and also Ryan for that. You know, the interesting part about the project for us at the end of the day was when this all started to come together. The point of this webinar was not to necessarily demo the solution, but to talk about how behind everything you just saw in a live demo of a live website is a fairly interesting distributed architecture, again, a hybrid cloud architecture. I also want to call out the support and the work we did with Esri in terms of they're supporting some really interesting services and some pretty amazing things they did on their server side. I also want to call out Microsoft in terms of working with us on the bleeding edge of Azure, as well as the work that Fred and the other members of the technical team did. That, you know, all the stuff behind the front end is what we're talking about. So in summary, what we've talked a little bit about here is customer-driven geospatial cloud. We may or may not in the future talk about things we're doing in Amazon and things we're now beginning to do with IBM in their smart cloud. There's more infrastructure at different ways available today than ever before to support solutions that are affordable to customers. And that's something that we may or may not do depending on interest, and other people want to hear more about this. Number two, we've talked a lot about a hybrid architecture. Again, when you think of the cloud and you're architecting this and you're thinking about this in terms of your organization, your business, whether you're government or private sector, small, medium enterprise, whatever, realize there's a lot of flexibility if you do the right planning in terms of what services you're creating, where they live, where your database lives, how you're ultimately answering the questions in a stable, secure way. So don't think it's either or, it's actually both and. There's a lot of flexibility today. Number three, the real exciting part is starting to get to the point where our client needed us to build and manage application logic in the cloud. Now again, in the very short time we have today in this webinar, we weren't able to really talk about that logic at the level that maybe people are interested in, and some of that is fairly proprietary. But the whole notion of building applications, deploying them to the cloud, ultimately saves companies like us, GCS, tremendous money. We had to make decisions at our company if we were going to continue to invest in infrastructure that frankly depreciates massively, and the depreciation rates are not getting better, or if we were going to try to focus on what we're good at, which is writing logic and writing application code. Then another key point is the ROI. Our client basically was asking us to really look at return on investment, and the way we're starting to look at that is essentially how much they were spending, how much they funded us, and how we could start to judge ROI, again, in a publicly subsidized solution like Montana Site Selector. TCO. More and more our customers are asking us to give them total cost. So it's not enough just to figure out how much this is going to cost in the public infrastructure or private infrastructure or cloud. It's another, we got to be looking at reducing the total cost for our clients. In this instance, we were given permission to talk about the metric of reducing total cost by 30% over 5 years. We're about a year into this, maybe a year and a half or so in this enterprise. It's continuously evolving. Remember the notion of agility. And by the way, if we can reduce our costs in terms of working with services from Esri and the cloud infrastructure from Azure, we can pass those costs onto our client and basically makes us more competitive, because we've got to find ways to reduce our costs so that we're, again, essentially in the game. I'm going to say it once, I said it twice, but the game is on in terms of base software license versus use of software versus software licensing. That is really in flux. It's a major disruptive trend going on right now, and I'm going to see that. Our uptime reliability, we're very proud of this. We've had 0 production level failures in 11 months, 0. And we think a lot about what servers that this lives on. We reduce our redundancy, reduce our dependency on any one single point of failure. So when you start designing cloud systems, you know, the uptime reliability is a major piece. But knock on wood, we've had 0 production level failures. We're very pleased with Microsoft in that. And then finally, development time is reduced. We are essentially, a lot of our work is firm fixed price here at GCS. So we need to find ways in a hyper-competitive world, especially coming out of the recession, how we're going to reduce our development time for our staff and make that happen faster. The more we can do faster with high quality and get that up into these infrastructures, again, infrastructure as a service, the better off we are in our bottom line, and then the more competitive we are in the boardroom when we're trying to, you know, solve problems for our clients. And I would imagine there's a lot of people on this call that are dealing with the same reality. The reality we deal with is there's less and less resources to do actually more and more. So that's the whole notion of doing more with less. And that's where, you know, people are adapting, or frankly, they're not. At that point, that's just a summary for you. And Kevin, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Alex, and that was a great wrap-up. Obviously, this was a content-rich presentation. We had a lot of info for the techies out there, as well as for the people who have to watch the bottom line. So I hope everybody learned something today. But we do know there are questions, and we're going to finish off today's session with questions from the audience. So if you have a question and you haven't already typed it in, go to your question box and go ahead, type that in. Send it over to me, and I'll try to read as many as I can to the panel, Alex and Fred, and they will answer them. And we're going to, again, stay to our commitment of finishing off at or before the top of the hour. So, Alex, I think this first question will be for you. Now, you touched on this a little bit, but it bears repeating. Why put a GIS application in the cloud?
Well, okay, good question. It depends on what the customer wants. I don't think all GIS applications need to belong in the cloud, but at the end of the day, there's no doubt that increasingly the biggest GIS leaders in terms of software, including Esri, are making major investments to move people to online experiences and online services, and essentially putting ArcObjects into significant global infrastructure. We see that trend, we're watching that trend, we're part of that trend. We had historically built and delivered GIS solutions for clients, and we would turn them all over and wrap them up in a nice bow and say, here you go, and then we'd watch them struggle with implementation, maintenance, deployment, uptime, essentially how to keep that all going. So we started seeing a trend about 3 to 4 years ago with more and more of our clients, and they represent a smattering of private sector, large insurance companies, real estate companies, state agencies, federal. We started to see a mega trend towards understanding how GIS was going to be built, deployed, and managed. Now, we didn't put everything into a public infrastructure cloud here provided by Azure or anybody else. Again, our point was to try to show you that things are living in many different places, but at the end of the day, the client is not having to spend, X amount of money every month basically trying to support that infrastructure, and the savings is significant. So that's a very quick answer to a really, again, a fundamentally important question. Why?
Okay. Yeah, and the next question really relates to the first, and it is, now for the Site Selector project, why did you choose Microsoft Azure instead of other cloud technologies that are available?
Okay, awesome question. Very good question. So what we didn't spend time on during this webinar is the vetting process that we went through with the major providers. For full disclosure, we are significant partners with Microsoft. We're proud of that. We work with them very, very closely, and we have inside knowledge of Azure and where Azure is going and what's going on there. There's some things that Fred sort of skipped over there in terms of stuff that's exciting for us. However, we also looked very carefully at Amazon and AWS, but for all the things we were looking for, which was a very kind of eclectic combination of factors and requirements, it was very untraditional in terms of what we were asking Amazon to bid on and give us the numbers. And when we started looking at this, AWS was not quite where we wanted it to be. There had been some failures there, and so we steered away from it, but we're looking at that all the time because we're letting the market now basically earn our business in terms of what infrastructure we're going to use. And then finally, if anybody's been paying attention to IBM, we think they're an 800-pound gorilla in this space too with their smart cloud. They're coming on strong. But when we were trying to price this out, we went with where we were comfortable. Another major point, 99% of the people here at GCS and their skill sets in terms of application developers, and you were talking to the senior guy today, or at least hearing from him, we're a big Visual Studio shop. So the ability to be able to design, build, deploy, manage with clicks of mouses from our desks here in Missoula was super efficient. We really liked that. We didn't have this big learning curve when we went from code to use. The other thing is we're a big SQL shop. We do a lot of work. I mean, GISs, to last time I checked, still revolve around databases. We loved what Microsoft Azure was doing. Long-winded answer to a very relevant question. We're excited that there's more options than ever, and frankly, there was a whole bunch of things that went into our decision calculus that we are constantly rethinking and analyzing so that we can pass on the best available price to our clients and that we have authoritative knowledge of what GIS means in the cloud tomorrow. But great question. Thank you.
Okay, great. And the next question is, I think, got a technical, yeah, it's a technical question, really. So let me see if Fred can chime in on this one. What was the most challenging technical aspect of this project?
The most challenging technical aspect, I would guess probably, as we went from a traditional in-house app and we rolled it over to Azure, some of the things about how do we store and interact with the file system data, learning about blobs, those might have been some of the more tricky technical issues. I got to say we did a really awesome design job with the client up front, and that made the development of this thing pretty smooth in the sense that the couple people who had worked with the client really kind of nailed down exactly the look and the user and the functions and things like that. So in a sense, it made it very simple for us to build in that sense. We also did do a number of kind of stepping outside of the ESRI spatial data box in this sense and went to the SQL Server, the native SQL Server types, and did some things there. So there was a little bit of a learning curve in terms of not having those native ESRI APIs and figuring out how to make those things work without the help of some of the ESRI stuff. So those were probably the biggest technical challenges.
Okay, fair enough. And not surprisingly, we're getting at least 2 questions so far on a topic that's a real big issue in the world today. The audience wants to know about the security of working in the cloud.
Yeah, I'll take that. So I alluded to that earlier. It's a great question. GCS spends a lot of time working for clients that are very, very concerned about managing and deploying and defending their assets in cyberspace. And at the end of the day, we don't see any panacea or any solution to cyber attack and cyber threat anytime soon. In fact, the problem's getting worse before it's going to get better. With that being said, in a lot of the design ideas and a lot of our talking with the majors about their offerings and what they were doing for security, one thing we liked was to try to rely on a major company like Microsoft or Amazon or IBM to really test them and stress them in terms of what they could offer to maintain the viability and the resiliency of the components that we're using. So this really comes down to viability and resiliency when it comes to withstanding a cyber attack. It's very important in this application that the photos are real and they're protected, that the values are real and protected, that the data that people are making business decisions on, I wouldn't say this is life and death application, but it's mission critical in terms of major business decisions. And as we roll this out into the Northwest and we look to expand this into the upper Dakotas or the upper Midwest, we're getting more and more about vulnerabilities. So we're trying to reduce the attack points. And when I talk about a single point of failure or 2 or 3 points of failure, instead of 20, we're trying to consolidate the threat horizon when it comes to the essential services and infrastructure that basically generates what you saw in the demo. That's one nice strategy that more and more people are coming up with. So we didn't wrap in intrusion detection and intrusion prevention and how to figure out how to withstand zero-day attacks. But I can tell you, if I had to bet $1.5 million or something like that on what infrastructure I wanted my application to live in, I'm going to go with a private sector corporation in terms of their assets than I am necessarily state government servers. The amount of money being spent to secure Azure or AWS or whatever is a lot more, in terms of CPU protection. It's a fundamentally good question. I don't think anybody has it figured out. If someone wanted to talk about that offline, we'd be happy to. It's a brave new frontier, and it's especially interesting for those of us in the GIS community, because traditionally we haven't necessarily had to think about how our apps were going to be attacked, compromised, spoofed, denied, and essentially impact mission-critical business processes within government or the private sector. And I think it's a huge growth area for businesses to get, especially GIS firms or clients, to figure out how to make our applications essentially more resilient to cyber attack. And that's where we're spending a lot of our mental energy moving forward.
Okay, wow, that's something to think about, that's for sure. Got some real technical questions here. I'm just going to throw these out here. The first one is there any limit to the images that can be managed as blobs?
Brad?
Technically no. I mean, well, I guess technically yes, there is an upper limit, but it's really fairly large. But again, being that this is a web app, we ask the users, or if they're uploading things manually, or if we're sucking them off through the MLS feeds, then we actually during the upload we sample them down into a nice web size. None of them are much more than a couple K, just so that the application can run quickly and the user gets a good experience in that sense. The people we talked to didn't feel that the pictures needed to be high quality images down to the user. They just needed to see get a basic feel for it, and then from there they'd be more happy with the performance of the images loading in the web browser than to actually have a high-res photo. So in that case, yeah, we kept them down very small.
Okay, and kind of as a follow-up, somebody else is asking, what's the advantage of storing images as blobs instead of having them in a file system?
Okay, so the way the Azure system works is that we are using for lack of a better word, the application instances. And in a sense, it is its own virtual machine, but it's not a durable virtual machine. So at any given point, when we swap a machine over from one instance to another, when we bring more instances on, when during the kind of nightly processes that Microsoft runs in their thing, instances will be turned off and brought back up. So at that point, you are starting over at your square one of your virtual machine at that point. So as users were loading up images, we had to find a way so that those images lived on as those VM instances got rolled and recycled. So there was a couple options there in that sense. We could have stood up a virtual a virtual machine that was durable and had it act just like a file system, and then we would have been managing the virtual machine in and of itself and things like that, just a la as if you had a a physical machine. We could have stuffed the images right into the database, or we could use blob storage. So the blob storage is essentially a durable space for data storage. And the nice thing about this was that we get URLs, direct access to those blobs, and as we define them in files. So there's a couple toss-ups as to which was essentially a better way to go. I think in general we chose the blob storage in this case because we were sort of in a let's learn how to use the blob storages. So but in a sense, I think managing them in blob storage is much simpler than managing them in a database or managing them in a virtual machine.
Okay, great. And somebody wants to know, at least I think I'm interpreting their question, is there any kind of limit to the amount of data that can be hosted in the Azure cloud?
I mean, most of the limits are what what you want to pay for. We have looked at some applications that we've been or systems that we've been kind of trying to design that would be up in the 10 to 100 terabyte scale stage, and at that point, mounting disks and things like that in the virtual in the virtual environments of the clouds. I think once you get to about that scale is where you start to get into some issues. If you have to deal with those things as native files. If you can start working with them in blobs, and kind of one of the things, if you people are GIS people, you'd understand like having a aerial photograph of and trying to serve that out through ArcGIS server or something, where ArcGIS server needs to see that as an image or see it as a file, so it doesn't know how to read blobs off of the Azure platform. So those are the kind of situations where you get into a little bit of trouble with blob storage in terms of size and things like that.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
Kevin, if I may jump in,
Sure.
I'd like to jump in there too. So everything's negotiable, and there are some technical things that Fred mentioned, but we haven't hit an upper limit yet in our discussions, and that's also fairly proprietary to what Microsoft is doing or not doing against its major competitors. I would also say that we've also been architecting a system in association with IBM that actually is pushing the limit right now of about 23 petabytes. And it's not just aerial photography or satellite imagery, which is big time, but it's another element that's driving the big data part of geospatial, and it's sound files and other types of files that have a geospatial component. They have a special spatial reference, but the sensor systems and the sensor grid and the sensor network, which is driving the Internet of Things, which we may talk about later this fall, the data volumes are ridiculous. And to manage that, store that, retrieve that in the cloud, we're looking at some big-time iron and some solid-state drives and some significant global storage area networks with universal addressing that is getting really interesting. You better have a big checkbook, though, in terms of trying to address that, and it's a very small group of people that can architect that and how that would feed into, again, a geospatial solution. Again, a little bit off topic, but I wanted people to be aware that things are getting very, very big, very, very fast, and it's not just your standard vector and raster data sets.
Great. Yeah, and somebody asked an interesting question here. In the Site Selector project, where was the big data? I mean, was it the app? Was it the data? Was it in the many databases, or all of the above?
No, it's all the above. That's the point. The 4 V's, volume, velocity, variety, and veracity, or authenticity or authoritativeness. Authoritative could also be part of the 3 A's. We argue, everything's debatable, but big data is often misperceived today as just being how much volume you're dealing with. It's not. The original thought from Gartner was that you had variety, you had issues of velocity. Again, increasingly in the GIS community, we're faced with dealing with near real-time or real-time streaming data. It just so happens that GCS and guys like Fred got involved early on in consuming data that was coming at us very fast. So my answer to the questionnaire or the attendee is that we argue that this is big data because it encompassed so many different elements of what I and many people argue is the quintessential big data definition. Complexity in a sense, and basically trying to squeeze out of our information and our assets new information. That's where, if we had a whole nother hour, we could drill down into the analytics that are going on in those reports and slice and dice it. Esri was really cool with their API. We can slice and dice those reports into anything you want, and we are, and basically customize those all day long now and deliver that with, a 5.9 uptime reliability. That's pretty cool in terms of siphoning all that off, staging it in a cache, and trying to deliver those kind of performances. And that, to me, is big data. But it's a great question. And that discussion I see starting to happen now in the GIS community. Outside the GIS community, big data has been hammered now for about 2.5, almost 3 years. And I think it's starting to really get into our communities.
Okay. Great, and we have time for just a few more questions here. We're coming up on the top of the hour, so if you have any last-minute questions, please send them in now. Here's a real specific one. Somebody wanted to know, how many different software licenses did you have to purchase to build this application?
Fred, do you have a calculator? Go ahead, Fred.
Excuse me. Yeah, no, actually my comment to this was that one of the nice things about using the Azure platform is that the SQL Server instance or the Azure instance and the Windows instance and things like that were essentially all rolled into a single cost for the use of Azure. So in that sense, we didn't have to worry about, oh, we got to buy a Windows Server license and we got to buy a SQL Server license and we got to buy all that. All we do is buy access into the SQL Server, application platform and our blob storage, and we pay for it on a use basis. So, so in a sense, we don't have to worry about licenses per se in that sense. So, at least from the, I guess the production standpoint. Now, obviously we're buying, Visual Studio licenses and things like that. So. But
okay.
Yeah, and we have
I do like about the Azure platform is that a lot of those licenses get rolled up into a single cost.
Okay.
And there's also, it's a key point, while we didn't necessarily do this, again, Esri was very good with us in terms of the Business Analyst Online API. There's actually an enterprise license for the entire state of Montana. We're looking at expanding that. We've got to work with Esri on that, if they will, and then we really want to consolidate. So it's a great question. Also, we have another client that we didn't want to talk about, and we can't on this phone, but they're doing 10 to 20 million transactions a month, basically buying what are called Bing transactions, basic services of that layer, and we really like to be able to meter that and throttle that for our client and sell those off in different increments. And again, from our overhead and our costing and our risk assessment, the easier we can do to consolidate. And the smart companies, and we saw Microsoft being out in the front, are making it easier to basically, essentially have Office as a service or Azure or SQL as a service. This is all, and eventually, as we all know, this is going to go operating system as a service. And that's when this gets really interesting, is that tipping point when basically we are totally cloud enabled in terms of our backbone. And we're really excited about that because, again, we want to focus on that versus how do we manage licenses.
Okay, and great. I just want to squeeze in one last question because it's so interesting. How easy is it to generalize Site Selector to other states?
Essentially, it's not necessarily as easy as you would think. essentially what we're dealing with is basically looking at the limitations of data licensing, data licensure. So the limiting factor in expansion in some of our strategic thinking is the infrastructure is there, but it really comes down to the licensing of the data and the negotiation on the data side, the content side. The infrastructure is ready to go. The code is ready to go. Really, you would have some instances of the MLS services to duplicate the same thing. Number two, how we break this down to the cadastre and some really technical elements of data layers. But the geometry, the infrastructure is all there, and it's good to go. And that's exactly what we're doing in planning right now. And you know, maybe in 3 or 4 months we have another webinar and talk about how this got rolled out nationally as a national enterprise. I'm not sure.
Okay, great. Well, and that's going to have to be the last word because we're out of time. And first, I want to thank the audience members for joining us today for the first Geospatial Big Data webinar. And just another quick reminder that you're invited back on August 15th when our second webinar will feature moving to mobility, leveraging location analytics. And if you have any other questions about geospatial big data, please visit the website at www.yourdatasmarter.com, and you'll be getting a follow-up email with instructions if you'd like to send questions directly to us and the rest of the panel. And again, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The